listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Hey, I feel all right now.
Hey, I feel all right now.
Do you feel like I do right now?
Do you feel like I do right now?
Motivated.
Good morning and welcome to America's Web Radio, and this is David's Pick, and I'm David and I get to pick who's on, and generally speaking we have a veteran on this show, and courtesy of Colonel Rick White, retired, who is the director of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And before we get started, we started something because a friend of mine, a veteran friend, had very severe surgery several weeks ago, and as it has turned out, it's almost a miraculous recovery. He had, because of Agent Orange, he had tongue cancer, and they literally had to take most of his tongue, and after that they reconstructed it and said, you know, it'll probably be months and or weeks, at least weeks, if not months, before he can speak, and he'll have to go through all of this therapy. But being a good ranger as he was, he came through it, and because they didn't take the tip of his tongue, he's already speaking, and he's a very, very close friend, and I salute him all the time. And I think what helped was the day that he was having surgery was the day we started having just a moment of silence for all of our veterans that have served and served us so well over the years, and they have given so much. And if you'll join me, we just take a minute and think about them, and thank God for our military and our veterans that serve so well. So we'll start, and we'll have our guest on momentarily. If you'll just take a minute and think about your relatives that may have been veterans or may be veterans, or friends and or people that are going in. So just wanted to thank our Maker for doing and taking care of and protecting our veterans. Thank you. So today we have Keith Bogle on, and Keith's a veteran, and we're very fortunate to have him on. As I mentioned at the very start, Rick White, Colonel White, retired, has gotten to be such a good friend, and he's Mr. Everything. I think he and a guy named Roger Wise. Roger knows everybody, and Rick works closely with Roger, and Roger has been doing, well, you can tell he's an officer because he keeps doing such a great job of lining up guests to be on America's Web Radio and David's Pick, and I want to thank him, always want to thank him. And then Keith is here, and we're going to talk about something that's right around the corner from both of us, I guess. I know it's right around the corner for me. It's in Newtown Park, and the Johns Creek Veterans Association decided, and by the way, it's Mike Mazzell is the president of the organization, and I have to say, Mike's an okay guy. No, he's a great guy. Like, you know, all veterans are. Oh, wait a second. I gotta ask the one tough question that I ask, Keith, and that is, and I've been to one of the Johns Creek meetings and so forth, and going to have a full intent of joining. But the one hard question that I'll ask, and if you can't answer it right off, well, you've got an hour to think about it. And that is, have you ever met a veteran that can tell only one story?
No. I think it's impossible because it always leads, one story leads to another, leads to another.
And what do you got if you got a group of veterans together? You got the one-upsman going.
Well, we do call our social hour the beer, brats, and BS sessions. So, you know, it's a whole lot of that.
But no, I love veterans. I love their stories, and and what I love the most about it is they're true. Now, every now and then a submarine might embellish it just a little bit, but for the most part, they're all true stories. And if you're not fortunate enough to know a veteran, then you ought to go out and find one, and just ask them, what they did, and you'll find it tremendously interesting.
Another thing about that, though, is when you hear them telling the stories, they're never war stories, because those who saw the war, they don't talk about it.
No, you're right.
And if somebody's talking about war stories and stuff, they're lying to you. They weren't there. The guys who saw it, they don't talk about it.
That's right. And in fact, and like I mentioned, and like I make clear on every show, yes, I served during Vietnam, but they've tagged it as Vietnam era, and I spell it ERROR, and they spell it ERA, but it's to each his own. But anyway, if I weren't a veteran, I've been told too that, I went through it. I raised my hand just like everybody else does, and a lot of veterans, and like you said, most of them, World War II will finally start breaking down and tell some stories. Particularly, I found Navy will. But no, you're right, and I've been told too that if I couldn't talk to the people that I've talked to, if I hadn't have been there and done that we all go through basic of some sort or the other, and we all have stories about basic and everything else. So I feel very fortunate that, like yourself, that you'll come on the show and we can talk. And
well, there's another thing that Colonel White always reminds us of that I think is important to remember, is that whenever you raise your hand and you take that oath, after that the government decides where you go. If you see combat, they dictated it. If you didn't, it was somebody. Because he was telling a story that, because Rick, he was in Vietnam twice. He was supposed to go back for a third time whenever the war was, the fighting stopped. And they were commemorating some folks that they lost over there. And he was talking to a buddy of his who I guess he had gone through OCS with, who was stationed in Europe. And this guy was telling Rick about how guilty he felt because he had spent the whole war in Europe and not on the battlefield in the jungles of Vietnam. And Rick said, well, you raised your hand just like I did. After that, it was it wasn't your fault. And it is a matter of circumstance. I mean, for everyone that served in country, there was like 6 or 8 behind them that never were. So
yeah, the support troops and everything else. Yeah. And, I look at it today, it's a different time, different era and all, but if it weren't for reserves today, we basically wouldn't have a military.
It's true.
And they've been called up, and they have performed well. And, so it's an interesting situation. And if you're a veteran and you've got a story that you want to tell, let me know. Just send me an email, GM at America's Web Radio, and we'll be glad to talk to you. And if you have a person that is a veteran, or you or a family member or a friend that needs a silent moment, let us know, and we'll be glad to dedicate a show to them. And I think that asking other brothers to say a word for my friend helped him and has gotten him through a troubled time. So anyway, we'll stop with that and start talking to Keith about. This is a first, Keith. I think, I'm not sure, but we went to school when there was a thing called the Southwest Conference. And we might have played a little football against each other. And I can't say that Texas Tech really had a whole lot of respect for University of Texas back then. But we all went to school. We all were in the Southwest Conference. And it's sort of like being in the military, which is, and I say this every week, is the military is the biggest fraternity and sorority in the world. And you always have the military in common with anybody you meet or anything else. Now, So you go to the University of Texas in Austin. I love Austin, as a matter of fact, or used to when I was in Texas, but and all of that area. And have a good friend that lives in Dripping Springs, just outside of Austin. And so you went to Texas, and why did you decide on Texas?
Well, I was in the military. I ended up at Bergstrom Air Force Base. I was married, and my wife and I had met at language school in Monterey. And she was in military intelligence, and so she was at Fort Hood. And I had this contract when I went into the military, and they screwed me over from day one, because I enlisted for 6 years because I was supposed to go to basic radio school overseas for a year, then come back and go to college and get paid as an E5, and then owe them 2 for 1, 2 years for every 1 year that they put me through college. Well, they did away with the program before I even got out of basic training. And I enlisted for 6 years because I got a promotion right out of basic training that normally took a year. And
and now, to clarify, you were in the Air Force, right?
I was in the Air Force, yes, sir. And so anyway, one thing led to another. So she ended up at Fort Hood, and because they broke my contract, I had the choice of getting out of the military or picking my base and taking whatever job was available at that base, or picking my job and then going anywhere in the world where that job was open in the Air Force. Well, she got orders to go to Fort Hood to the military intelligence unit there. So I just got a map out and
that's oxymoron, by the way.
Yes, it is. And well, especially for her, she was an interrogator, and she had to go through interrogation school at Fort Huachuca outside of Tucson, twice, because they had to break her spirit. She had to become a whole new person to be able to do that. Anyway, so I picked up a map, and Bergstrom in Austin was the closest Air Force base. Now, I grew up in Virginia, and I entered the military from Virginia, and Virginia wanted me to pay state income tax while I was gone, even though I may set foot in the state a long weekend once a year to see my folks at a holiday or whatever. And Texas had no state income tax. So I became a state resident, and then I decided I was going to get an accounting degree for some reason, because I had a thing for numbers, and Texas had a top 10 undergraduate school in the country. And being a state resident, it only cost me $4 a credit hour to go to school.
Wow.
So that's how I ended up with Texas, and my wife and I, we bought a house, and I went to school full-time and worked full-time because my GI Bill made my house payment plus $25. And if I went to school year-round, that money kept rolling in. Then I also got a job working full-time as a computer operator, and I got hired. The IT director was a retired Navy Chief Petty Officer, and he loved my story, so he hired me. So they paid my tuition plus 50% of my books plus a salary. And so I was and whenever I got my accounting degree, I was making more money working full-time and living in Austin than anybody. They offered me to start as an accountant. And I still had money left on the GI Bill, so I stayed in another year and got at the time it was called a data processing and analysis degree, but it turned into what is now a MIS program. They had determined that computer science majors were too bit and byte oriented about the internal workings of a computer, but they didn't know how to use the computer to solve a business problem. So they put the focus in the business school. So I was able to complete that in a year, because I didn't have to take a lot of the extra math and stuff, because it was mostly business courses that I'd already had. So then it turned out, and I spent the next 35 years designing accounting systems on the computer. So it worked out pretty well.
You know, you mentioned your wife at Fort Hood. Unfortunately, I was... Not unfortunately. I can't say I ever really suffered when I was in basic or doing my 2 weeks or whatever it happened to be. But I did know Fort Hood very well. And they had, because it was a mechanized training fort, and those tracks would grind up dirt and rocks into little bitty pieces of dirt that you felt like you were walking in mush, you know, or marching in mush, and you'd sink almost, and it'd be dry as it could be, but you'd sink down into that dirt just like you were walking in a swamp or something.
Yeah, it was a pretty interesting. Since she was at Fort Hood, which is outside Killeen, and I was at Berkshireman, Austin, it's about 90 miles apart. So we took turns. For a while, we'd live in an apartment in Austin, and she would travel back and forth to Fort Hood. And then for a while, we lived up there, and I would travel back and forth to Austin. We were living out in a trailer in Lake Belton, which is
I know Lake
between
Belton,
Killeen and Waco. Yeah. And those artillery pieces at Hood, and it's still 25 miles away. Those things would go off, and our trailer would shake from 25 miles away. I couldn't imagine what it would have been like standing next to one of those guns going off.
Didn't you like the illuminations?
It
looked like big fireworks, you know.
And then being some of my buddies, you could go. It was very regulated and regimented, but you could hunt on Fort Hood, and we'd go deer hunting there, and they take you out and put you in a stand, and you had to stay in the stand until they came to pick you up, because you weren't allowed to get out on the ground and go around, because there could be unexploded live ordnance and stuff like that. But it was amazing to be put out there in the stand in the pitch black, and then right before sunup, the ground would start shaking as they started warming those Abrams up. Yeah. And then the sun comes up, and you see this line of Abrams up on the hill, and it's pretty awe-inspiring, the power that they have there.
Oh, it's
largest U.S. military base in the world.
It's it's an incredible fort, and I think it was Hood that I never went there, other than you'd drive by it. It was right after the front gates was Eisenhower Hospital.
I'm not sure of the hospital there, because most of the Army hospital there is, the ones down in San Antonio, because they have the Brooks Army Hospital down there.
Yeah.
When we were there, though, was it George Patton's? I think it was his son or his grandson was the commander there, and he had Patton's pistols that he'd wear around. He was almost as cocky as his grandfather, but he didn't have the resume to back it up. But it was still pretty interesting to see him strutting around with those pistols on.
Well, it's sort of like my son when he was going to Texas A&M, and he calls up and Dad, guess who I just used the bathroom with? Why are you calling me and asking me that question? Well, President Bush came in and stood right next to him. But and this is the like I started off by asking, have you ever met a veteran that has one story? And this is what the military gives, and what Johns Creek has done. And before I get into that, I want to mention again the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And the biggest compliment that Rick White and Paul Lindgren can get is the fact that it's being copied in many different states now. And that's the height of respect and the height of understanding what a state has done and what Paul and Rick have done. And if you're traveling to, or you living in Atlanta and you haven't been to the Hall of Fame, please take the time to go downtown. It's right across the street from the state capitol. It's in the Floyd building, and they have a very good cafeteria there too, so you can go down in the morning, eat lunch, and finish up your tour in the afternoon. But you'll read some stories that are just mind-boggling, what our great veterans and our great citizens that loved the United States have done in the past. And with that being said, what Johns Creek has done, if you're not aware of it, and I'm not going to steal the thunder, but they have the healing wall. So, Keith, what is a healing wall?
Well, first, thank you for having me on today. Shortly after the city of Johns Creek was incorporated, veterans in the city came forward with a request that the city do something to acknowledge the many veterans in our areas. So it started off with the creation of the Veterans Memorial Walk, which is the city of Johns Creek gave us 4.5 acres in a corner of the park, And then
Newtown Park.
in Newtown Park, yes, sir. It's off of Old Alabama Road.
By the way, I got to stop you. Would you quit calling me sir?
I'm sorry.
I know I'm 50 years older than you, but I was just a grunt.
Well, you know what? Whenever I used to work, when I was a professional, I used to get in a lot of trouble, especially if I was answering to a female, and especially if she was younger than I was. That would give me all that stuff. But unfortunately, I can't do now what I did then, and it was to give you my mother's name and phone number for you to call her, because that's the way she raised me. But anyway, we created the park, and at the time when we finished it, we have memorials for World War I, II, Korea, POWMIAs, nurses, Purple Heart, and the funds were privately raised. And so we were I think the fourth or fifth largest privately funded veterans memorial in the country. Then back in 2017, to commemorate the Vietnam War Memorial Day, we hosted the Traveling Wall That Heals. It's a 2/3 replica of the Vietnam War Memorial on the Mall in D.C. This thing travels around the country, and every 5 years they retire it and bring out another one. Well, we had the largest turnout, raised the most money, and all kinds of firsts with it when it visited Johns Creek. And so there was a competition on who to want. Anyway, long story short, we won the competition to get the wall. And now that we've, even in spite of COVID, we have installed the wall. We haven't had our official dedication yet because the city hasn't granted us the permission for a crowd as large as we expect to have when we do but it is open to the public. It has been since Memorial Day. It's quite a presentation. The folks from the Vietnam War Memorial Foundation in D.C., the photos and videos that we've sent them of it, they say it's the best of I think we're the fourth or fifth one in the country as far as the display of the Traveling Wall, and is by far the best presentation of it. And it was incredible working on it. We were shut down for a few weeks because of COVID, but then we proceeded anyway. So Rick and Colonel White and myself and Bill Howe, who was on your program last week, we were out there helping the concrete guys and carrying those 250-pound slabs of granite to go makes up the base, and it's quite impressive. And we hope to have the eventual dedication for it before too long.
I think one other thing that Mike was telling me about that y'all will have shortly is the kiosk that you'll be able to go to it and type in a name and find out exactly where. I mean, even at the big wall in D.C., I found it frustrating going through trying to find the name of a friend or whatever that I knew was there or on the wall. It was just a matter of finding it. But now at Johns Creek, y'all will have the kiosks and the computer where you can type in a name and it'll give you where to go to find that name.
Indeed, when you type in a name, it'll bring up a short bio on the person and what their service, a little bit about what put them on the wall, as well as the location, because there's panels east and west from the apex, and it'll tell you which line and how many numbers in, and it's very helpful. Now, the one thing of those who have seen the wall in D.C., when they come out here, the one thing with the one in D.C. that's actually the names are engraved in granite, you can take a piece of paper and a pencil, and you can transfer the name. I was working for a company based in D.C., and we'd have people come in from our corporate office outside of Chicago, and we'd always take them on the monument tour. And I'll never forget the time that we took them, and the Vietnam War Memorial was always one of the monuments that we visited. And the one time that one of the guys from Chicago came in, and he found his brother's name on the wall. And I'll never forget him doing the transfer of the name to a piece of paper as tears are coming down his face because he was capturing it to take it home to his mother. And in D.C., I never visited the wall that there wasn't someone there that was having a moment. I mean, I'd never been to another memorial that was so obvious to me that it had such powerful meanings to people.
I'm sure you know Roger's story.
I was just getting ready to say that Roger tells that story. See, I'm also, in addition to being the vice president of the Johns Creek Veterans Association, I'm also captain of the color guard, and we're called upon to present the colors at many an event.
You know, you'd say that, and I brought this up the other day, and we're going to have a junior varsity or junior ROTC come in, and I don't know about other vets, but for me, you can say the word color guard, or I can see a color guard, and I still get chill bumps.
Oh, it's quite an honor for us, and you know, I think we get a pass sometimes because we're a bunch of old farts out here trying to do it, and you know, we may not always be in precise step because some guys' steps are a little bit not what they used to be. I mean, one of our guys, Peter Manfrey, who's suffering his own health issues right now, he was a door gunner for a Chinook in Vietnam. He got 2 Purple Hearts. And he may have limp a little bit, or he can't carry a rifle. He carries a flag because his arm doesn't quite work all the time right. You know, I have more I have more regard for that man. He's the sweetest, most gentle person I've ever known, I think. And I mean, the first time the Chinook got shot down and landed on his head. So he took a couple months to recover, then they put him right back up there. And then the next time he got a bullet, came up through the floorboard, through his foot, and then through his arm. And he's still the sweetest, most humble person, and I love him to death. And that's why I'm very appreciative of your moment of silence, because we have a lot of guys in the JCVA that are suffering from various health issues, and most of them are not necessarily service related as in combat, but you know, a lot of guys are getting stuff from Agent Orange that it's not showing up for 50 years. And the whole gamut, your guy with tongue cancer, I mean, we got guys with Lou Gehrig's disease that they attributed all back to the Agent Orange. And when you had Bill on last week talking about support of Trump's and his open water, the Blue Water Bill, you know, but we're still fighting these battles 60 years after the war. And the terrible thing about the guys who are serving over in the sandbox or who have been serving in the sandbox, they're going to be fighting the same fights for the next 50 years over the diseases and impairments they get from those burn pits they have over there.
Yeah.
So we're so quick to send our best and brightest off to fight these wars, but then we turn our backs on when they come home. It is just, you know, you got the 22 a day on suicides, which I still think is an understatement. I mean, I don't know. I think before we ever send anybody to battle, it should be vigorously fought and debated and no stone left unturned before we ever commit them. But once that first troop plane or ship or anything is loaded, there's only one result. That is winning it.
Win.
Is keep the politicians and the cake eaters out of it and let the warriors go in and fight it. Yeah, it's going to be nasty. It's going to be, but it's supposed to be.
Vietnam was, as I mentioned, I think last week too, is that, you know, we went into Vietnam thinking it was another. Even Korea wasn't as nasty as Vietnam, but we thought Vietnam was going to be another World War II, which, quote, unquote, air quotes, was sort of a clean war. They were over there, we were over here, and we were shooting back and forth at each other, sort of like the revolution, you know? And you didn't have some of the dastardly, inhumane things that the Vietnamese did to our soldiers. And you know, I've got to do one other thing on this, because I know we have a lot of veterans that do listen. And, you know, President Trump, whether you like him or not, he has done a lot for the veterans. And one of those things, and this is with my friend, is that he had a choice of where he went. And I was talking to a doctor today that right before this show, and he works at the VA and says it's still a joke but better than it was. But the best thing that Trump did was give the veterans the opportunity to choose where they wanted to go. So my friend went to MD Anderson, one of the best hospitals in the world for cancer, and he's had a miraculous recovery. And I salute our president from being able to stand up to Congress and say we've got to take care of our veterans. And no matter what the fake media says, President Trump supports the military. And I guess I think I said this last week too. I almost cried when I went to see my son in Hawaii at his base, and there was this was during the Biden administration, Obama-Biden administration, and there was plane after plane on the runway, and I said, I asked my son, what are all this, they're being cannibalized, and they had to be cannibalized because the military budget had been cut back so much that they couldn't even fly their support missions or their training missions. And that's not true today. They are flying and flying proud.
I have a little bit different story about Hawaii and the military. My current wife and I, we just celebrated our 25th anniversary last weekend, September the 5th, and which was also the 75th anniversary of victory over Japan. We got married 25 years ago in Maui, and so we spent a few days in Honolulu. Our friends whose house we got married at, she was into numbers, because they had gotten married there on 8/8/88, August the 8th of 1988. So she called us up early in 95, and she said, how about 5995? And I said, no, that's a little bit too early. And my wife hates me to tell this story, but I got the Texas football schedule out, and that year they opened their football season against the University of Hawaii in Honolulu. So I looked at the map and I called Jeannie up and I said, how about 9595? So we were getting married so we spent a few days on Maui, and our buddy worked for GTE, which was the local telephone company. So he got us a really nice room with a balcony overlooking Waikiki Beach, and then out in the distance was a Diamond Head. So we knew we were in for something special. We went to get our wedding license. It was in the building that at the opening of Hawaii 5-0, where 5-0 headquarters was. Well, that's the building that we had to go get our wedding license in. And as we were going in, all of a sudden, every car alarm around us started going over because there was a formation of helicopters came across right at rooftop level, and the vibration set all the things off. Because it turned out it was that weekend they were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the victory over Japan. So that evening we were sitting out on the balcony, and around Diamond Head, the Navy did a sail-by. And it had all of their latest and greatest warships and stuff sailing by, and I'm sitting, and it just a little chills because my dad was in the Navy. And then overhead, the Air Force and other organizations flew over. Now, with the airplanes, there's still some World War II ones around, like Spitfire Zeros and Mustangs and things like that, but they flew from those all the way up to the B-1, the B-2, the F-135, all these planes flying over, and it was so impressive, the American power. The only disappointing thing is that Clinton was president then, and he was out there for the celebration, and he was bivouacked on the USS Yorktown, which they had anchored in the middle of Pearl Harbor. And because of that, the harbor was closed, so I wasn't able to go to see the Arizona Memorial, which I wanted to do to honor my dad, who had served in the Navy and during Korea. So, but anyway, that was pretty cool, though, to see all that show the power. It was amazing.
Well, I went to a lot of museums when we were in Hawaii, and thoroughly, and it was good. It was good. So let's get back to Keith. And okay, so tell us, what else would you like to say about Johns Creek Memorial?
Well, again, this week, tomorrow, September the 18th, 18th is National POW MIA Appreciation Day. we have a list of speakers who are, and we Johns Creek Veterans Association, in conjunction with the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame, are going to commemorate the occasion. Now, we have a list of speakers, but they are in such demand that we couldn't put everything together for Friday, the actual date. So on Saturday, the September the 19th at 4 p.m. at the Veterans Memorial Walk in Newtown Park in Johns Creek, at 4 p.m. at the POWMIA Memorial, there will be a laying of the wreath. Our color guard will be there to present the colors. Roger Wise will be introducing us with his "Freedom Isn't Free" speech that always stirs the crowd up. There'll be a Marine Corps group there that will be providing the 21-gun salute, and we're going to have a bugler there to sound taps, and we're also going to have a bagpiper play some inspirational music. That's at 4 o'clock. Then after the laying of the wreath, there'll be a procession over to the amphitheater, Burkhalter Amphitheater, which is right in the middle of the park, at which point we're going to have 5 different speakers that are all Vietnam POWs. Now, these go from like Bill Robinson. He was the longest enlisted military POW in American military history. His story is pretty interesting because he was never actually out in South Vietnam. He was in the Air Force, and he was part of the pararescue team, and he was stationed in Thailand. They got called on a mission to go rescue a pilot and co-pilot down in North Vietnam. So they went in, and then they were shot down attempting to rescue the pilot and co-pilot, and they were interned together. After he returned to the United States, he wrote a book, and I believe it's entitled "The Longest Rescue." And when asked why did he name it, he said, I was never actually in South Vietnam. He said, but we went into North Vietnam to recover these pilots, and they walked out of the prison camp the same day we did, which I think is a tremendous story. And then another one is Lee Ellis, who we had the pleasure of speaking at one of our JCVA monthly meetings a while ago. He was a POW for 5.5 years. Bill was one for 7.5. And the thing that inspired me the most about Lee is, if you sit and try to imagine what being a POW like, especially in the Hanoi Hilton and all the horror stories that came out of that, of torture, and he will admit that stuff happened, but that's not what he remembers. That's not what he took out of it. That's not what's made him the person he is today. The lessons learned and how he actually benefited from it. If more and more people heard that story and took it to heart, especially the young people, I think the situation in our country would be so much different. And these stories are...
By the way, the 2 men that you've mentioned, people can go on our website. We've interviewed them, and they've told their stories. And you can download their archive interviews anytime you want. And they are very inspirational.
Yeah, and Lee has made his life as a motivational speaker and a life coach and stuff like that. So he has several books out that are very, very, very beneficial. The thing that these stories mean to me is that when I was stationed at Bergstrom from 75 to 79, a lot of the POWs who came back, those who stayed in the service, most of them got out, but those that stayed in, we had several of them stationed at Bergstrom. And one of those was Colonel John Stavis. He was a POW for 7.5 years. You know, I was telling you earlier about how my wife and I, my wife at the time, we'd take turns of whether she traveled from Austin to Killeen or I traveled from Fort Belton or from Lake Belton to Austin. Well, it was during a period where I was traveling back to Bergstrom, and I had a Volkswagen pop-top camper, and I worked in an office, so I didn't want I took pride in how I looked in my uniform, so I didn't want, in the hour-and-a-half drive, my shirt to get all wrinkly. So I'd put my blue pants on, my boots, and a T-shirt, and I'd hang my shirt on a hanger behind the seat, and then when I got to the office, I'd put my shirt on and I'd get all like I'm supposed to be. Well, I pull into the building and I'm parked right in front of the building. I'm not 10 steps from the front door. And so I get out, I grab my shirt, I have the door open, I'm walking in, and I hear, "Airman!" And I look over, and there's Colonel Stavis just driven by the corner of the building, and he saw me, and he called me. And I can tell you, if any other officer on the base had called me on that, probably wouldn't have bothered me a bit. But knowing that he had been a POW for 7.5 years, and the hell that he had been through, that was one man I had to honor. And that it's been, God, 40 years? I don't know. It's been a long time, but it still bothers me today that he's the one that caught me. And anyway, I was talking to Lee Ellis about it, and he said he was very, very good friends with John. We lost him a couple years ago, but anyway, so I'm just looking very much forward to listening to these people, and I hope the people will come out and listen to their stories, because it's pretty awe-inspiring.
It is, and I'm just glad that we're beginning to honor all veterans, not just Vietnam, but we're honoring our Desert Shield and Desert Storm veterans and anybody that served. And the one thing that another thing that I do, because it's my show and I can do it, but I have all the respect in the world and honor them almost above any and everybody, and that's the dust-off pilots. What they did in Vietnam revolutionized the helicopter and the importance of it, and if there's ever been a spotlight that should be shined on someone, it's the dust-off pilots that never, I don't think one of them ever thought about themselves, ever. All they were focused on was doing their job, picking up somebody that had been shot down or wounded or whatever. And I just, again, have all the respect in the world for a dust-off pilot.
And that actually, that is one of our hope to future memorials, to add to our Veterans Memorial Walk, that we have some
Well, I got another one we're talking about too that is going to be from America's Web Radio, and that's honoring all the women that served in Vietnam, and the nurses that we've had Donna Rowe on. I'm sure you know Donna. And she jumped on the helicopter and went with the dust-off pilots on many occasions. And Vietnam taught us a lot. And the stories, like you said, veterans generally won't tell war stories, but the ones that have and the ones that we've heard, just unimaginable that one human could do that to another human. And it was a eye-awakening war, I guess. And one of the funny things was General Dix did a show for us, remembering Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and we were talking about the fact that our government, and I don't want to say this wrong because my son's in Intel and I know that he must be doing a great job and knows what he's doing, but it was going into Desert Storm. We took our European tanks and APCs and equipment that were green and put them on a sand desert, and they stuck out like sore thumbs, and so they had to ship everything back to the United States to Fort Stewart, and they started painting them. Well, we get in the same go around, and we have been very blessed, very, very blessed. And a lot of folks don't understand this, that we've won in spite of ourselves many times. And I honestly think that has to be that we're still loved by the man upstairs. And we may make mistakes, but he's still got our six. And we make mistakes, but we come out of it, and we'll come out of our problems that we have today. So, with that being said, we've got about 13 minutes to go. What else do we need to hit on?
You're talking about stories, the unsung heroes and stuff. Have you seen the recent movie, The Last Full Measure?
Mm-hmm.
it's the story, and I'm reticent to bring it up because I can't remember the airman's name. Anyway, he's the first and only Air Force enlisted person to be awarded the CMH. He was an air rescue. He went into a battle in Vietnam. It was, of course, every time you hear these stories, they say it's always the bloodiest battle of the war. But anyway, he was Air Force pararescue, and they went in to extract wounded from this battle. And whenever they flew in, found out that the medics on the ground had all been either wounded or killed. So he just dropped the line right down in the middle of the battle, and he hooked people up, and he refused to leave. And he stayed there, and he fought with them. Now, if you listen the movie, I mean, the Army the leadership just totally screwed up that battle. That's why it was kept silent for so long, because they made so many mistakes and left these guys there to die. But he had multiple options to leave, and he refused, and he stayed there, and he died in battle, fighting alongside these Army guys that he didn't know from Adam, but it was just the right thing to do. And it was the survivors from the Army that fought for 30 years to get him the proper recognition. Wow. And, the stories from, I guess Vietnam is, like you said, that was our war, not that we were there, but our time frame and friends and family and stuff went there. So it's always one that's close to my heart. But
with that story, I again try to always mention that my attitude changed considerably with the stories that I've heard, and I would love to have someone on if you know him. But during our era, I had zero respect for anybody that was a conscientious objector, and we had a bunch of them. That I was right at the end of the draft and in the lottery, and then the volunteer started shortly after that. But we had conscientious objectors that wound up serving. They wouldn't carry a weapon, but they carried the bag with the Red Cross on it. And so many of them are incredible heroes that they would risk their lives to go give aid to a downed soldier, downed anything. And if you were a conscientious objector, please take my apology and know that I salute you and respect you for the service that you gave to our brothers and sisters that were wounded anywhere. And there were, it's amazing, like the stories. And if you will, we got about a minute, or no, we got a couple of minutes to go. I want you to relate Roger's story in a minute, but we've got so many people that, for lack of better words, and they don't know themselves, and they go into battle or they go into a situation, and the real person comes out, the real hero comes out, and not a one of them will say they're a hero. But I can honestly say, and I bet you'd be the same way. I don't think there's a branch in the world that would take either one of us back again. But if we were called, I don't think I've had a veteran on that if we were needed, we'd go back in a heartbeat. And I think that goes.
Some folks may find that out on the city streets here in the United States, depending on what happens in the future. Because we've got quite a standing army right here, right now, of veterans.
Yep, you're right. So anyway,
Roger. Okay,
Roger Wise.
Like I said earlier, whenever I visited the wall in D.C., there's never a time that I was there that someone wasn't having a moment because of visiting the wall. It was taking them back to a place in the war or time that they'd probably forgotten, or a battlefield where they're back with their friends. same reason that a lot of people never saw the wall in D.C. because they didn't have the courage, they thought the courage or whatever, or they were reluctant to face it again. So when we had it here, when we had it on display, it was 7 or 10 days in March of 2017. It was open 7 by 24. We had people there to not oversee the wall, but to be there to help people that were there. And a lot of people visited during the day, and it was great to see young parents out there with their kids telling them about what it was. But it was in the late night hours or the early morning hours that you would see it was the vets that were out there, and they'd be sitting there and you alternately crying or laughing or whatever. They're sharing stories with their buddies on the wall. Well, one day Roger's out there and this lady is out there with her son, and she said, "Mr. Wise, are you Mr. Wise?" He said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Could you hold on for a minute? I want to talk to you, but first we have to go to the." He said, "Sure." So she takes her son out to the wall. They have a moment, and then they come back, and she comes up to Roger with tears in her eyes, and she says, "I want to thank you." He said, "My son was able to meet his father today for the first time," because she had been pregnant with her son whenever her husband had deployed to Vietnam, and then he never returned home. And I've heard Roger tell that story 100 times, and I never once hasn't there been an audible noise from the crowd and more than one teary-eyed. And that's how powerful that wall is. And I know when we were out there putting the granite up, the panels with the names were already up, but we're putting the granite up on the base and on the top. And the number of vets that would come out, and now I talked about vets that wouldn't talk war stories and stuff, but it's different when you're standing in front of that memorial, because they'll come up and they'll touch a name on a panel, and then they have to tell you about that person. And the only way they can tell you about that person is that day in that terrible place and what happened. A kid who I went to church with, and he went to my high school. He's on panel 31 East. No, 31 East, line 57. He was 19 years old in February of 1969 in the Marine Corps when he was killed. And I stay in touch with his family, and I know how much it means to them, how painful it still is to this day. What is it, 51 years later, whatever. So I know what that wall means to people, and that's why I take such great pride in what we've done to put forth there, and the manner in which we've presented it. I mean, we've tried to do it with as much respect to not only the 58,314 names that are on there, but if you take in all the people who've died of Agent Orange, that wall would be 3 times the size that it is. And we just do our best to honor those who came before us, and that is the war that most of us are surviving still. We have very, very few WW2 warriors left, and just a few more of the Korean veterans. So, and we're losing the Vietnam veterans daily. So and I know that from my position as captain of the color guard. Over the last year, we've presided and handled the flag duties at multiple veterans' funerals, and I know the Supreme Court has issued that it is a constitutional right to burn the flag. I understand that, and there's people that went to war and died to protect the people's right to do something so stupid and inconsiderate. However, at these events and presenting the flag to a veteran's family and seeing what it means to them, I view the whole flag burning as totally something different. But
I've said, and I've asked a couple of veteran friends, I've been very fortunate that I've never walked up on somebody desecrating our flag, burning it, stomping on it, or doing anything else, because I don't know what I'd do. I know I'm already crazy, so I'd be that much more crazy, I suppose. But we ought to walk on our knees every day and always, thanking God for the fact we were born here and we live here. And part of that is our flag that the Star-Spangled Banner covers. And, you know, we are so fortunate. And my thing is, like many people's, you don't like it, move. Go somewhere else. Go to another country. See how you like Venezuela today, you know, and get the hell out of my country because I love it. And you don't have any right to do anything to the flag other than salute it. By the way, tomorrow, during the 19th and stuff, and a lot of veterans don't remember this or don't, maybe they don't know it, but when our national anthem is played or a color guard goes by, if you're a veteran, you have every right to salute. And that,
the Congress passed the law that even if you're not in uniform, you're a vet, render a salute.
And like I said, the color guard and our country, and when you're saluting, you're not just saluting the flag going by, but you're saluting the country. And we're in the greatest country in the world. And so fortunate. With that being said, Keith, we're about out of time.
Well, it's been an honor and privilege to be on your show today, Dave. I appreciate it.
Well, will you come back?
I'd be glad to.
Love to have you, and we might even talk more about you if you come back. And we could give Mike Mazzell a little grief, and Rick White a little grief, and
Colonel White deserves. Both of them do a lot. Mike does a lot with our organization and leadership and involvement in other organization, and Rick White, what he's done for both the JCVA and what he's doing for the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. I'm just proud to have both of them as my friends.
It's an honor, and again, this is something that I say all the time, that if you're a grandparent or a parent and you've got or a kid listening to the show and you haven't decided what you want to do after you graduate from high school or from college, look at the military. It is a fantastic opportunity, and there's a program. I don't think the military misses anything of being able to educate you in something that you want to do, and it's everything from data processing up and down the gambit. And a lot of kids like airplanes and like flying drones. Well, there's a heck of a program for that, and it's anything that you want to do. And with that being said, we want to thank you for listening to America's Web Radio, and ask that you tell your friends. And I hope that we can twist Keith's arm and telling a couple of his friends about being on America's Web Radio. We certainly appreciate Keith coming over and being here in person, live and direct from the studios of America's Web Radio. And we do thank you and look forward to you coming back, Keith.
Thanks, David.
Take care.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.